Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. It is time for another Ask a Crafter where I answer questions from you. And this first one comes from Shy Bean. I know every artist has works they are really proud of and ones they're not so proud of. What are your best and worst creations, Lindsay? That is such an unusual question. I never thought about that before. I think one of my favorite paintings is one that I don't think I've ever showed on the channel, and I think it's hanging in my daughter Macy's room. It is a still life done in watercolor crayons, and I did it many years ago. I think it was before I started doing YouTube. I did them with my Neocolor 2 Caran d'Ache watercolor crayons, and I don't know if anybody else would think it was all that, but I really liked it because it was just fun to paint. I liked the way it looked when it was done, and it was just like lots of like fruits and berries in a bowl. I don't know why I liked it so much, but I did. And my worst creations, oh my gosh, I have sketchbooks and sketchbooks full of creations I don't like. I've probably forgotten about them because honestly, I take my bad art and I burn it. So as long as it doesn't have acrylic paint on it or something that's going to off-gas weird, nasty things, into the fire pit it goes. I honestly don't think much about art after I create it. I don't think back at I forget so many of the things that I painted because I don't tend to look back at them. I paint it and I move on. The sketchbooks are fun because then I don't have to deal with the artwork. It just sits in a book, and then it's fun like years down the line to go flip through because I will honestly have forgotten about all of these. I mean, I'll remember creating them when I see them, but I generally kind of forget about them and move on. I'm always focused on what my next thing is. I don't really think too much about my past creations. I think you can make yourself kind of crazy if you dwell too much on what you've done in the past. Let's see. Okay, Horsewoman 2000 asks, and I think I actually did reply to her. You had mentioned doing a video on watercolor ground, how to make it, ingredients. Would it be cheaper than store grounds? This would make a great video. Well, I think I was miscredited because anytime I need to use watercolor ground, I actually use the Daniel Smith ground, and I really only use it as whiteout, basically. I don't like painting on watercolor ground personally because I prefer the paper, the texture of paper. I have painted like some tins with watercolor ground and done some paintings on them, and I have like messed up like one of the first pages in a sketchbook, and it really bummed me out, so I painted over it with watercolor ground and then repainted something there because I didn't want to have a big, booger of a painting in the beginning of a sketchbook. So I did that so I could paint over it, but I really just don't like the texture of the watercolor ground versus paper. But when I do need watercolor ground, I use a Daniel Smith white watercolor ground. You can thin it down if you need to. And I find it extremely helpful though, if you're working on a painting and you mess up a small bit, then you paint over it with watercolor ground, let it dry, and then you can paint over it just like you're painting over paper. Now it's not exactly like paper, but for a small area, I find it very useful. And the last children's book I illustrated, the author had a change that she needed made, and I needed to put a piece of bright yellow sea glass on the collar of a black dog, so there's no way I was going to be able to scrub out and get to paper again so I could put bright yellow. So I used the watercolor ground, worked a treat. It was great for that. But as far as painting on the watercolor ground, I don't really care for it. And there's a couple of reasons. I could use, I could paint masonite with watercolor ground and just do watercolors and then wax them and hang them up. But honestly, watercolor is not meant to be exposed to the elements like that. Watercolor really, it doesn't have the binder. It does not have the protection that acrylic paint and oil paint have. So it really ought to be matted in under glass or plexiglass. And if it's a painting that I'm going to spend some time on, I'm not going to leave it out to the elements like that. I just don't think watercolor is a durable enough medium to be exposed without glass. I mean, for an experimental piece, sure, why not? There's nothing wrong with that. But I think if it's something you want really to have longevity and you pay a lot for these watercolor paints, I think that I would just go for paper and that. So I don't personally use it. So that, and I haven't made a watercolor ground. I mean, I'm sure you could do like, you can make something with like a plaster in it that would be absorbent for the watercolor. But I think I think that might be, that might be penny wise, pound foolish. Because if your stuff starts flaking off or your watercolor starts rubbing off, then I wouldn't trust a homemade version of that. There's some things I do not DIY. I don't DIY Mod Podge. I've seen a lot of DIY recipes for that. I don't DIY alcohol inks. I've tried and I've never found a really good substitute for purchased alcohol inks that will be waterproof and will hold up on like beads or anything like that. So I don't DIY alcohol ink, and I don't DIY gesso or watercolor ground. it's the foundation for your artwork. Do you want to risk it? I don't. You can go ahead. It's your life. You do what you want to do. But not me. I will DIY lots of stuff, but those are just things that I don't DIY. But I'm sure there are recipes online for that, and I encourage you to explore that. And good luck. I mean, I'm definitely not judging anybody that wants to DIY it. That's just why I don't. For one thing, I don't like the product to begin with that much unless I use. It's kind of one of those. It's nice to have if you need it, but I don't like to use it otherwise. And let's see. Okay, Jen Famous Art asks, is the secret to success a willingness to do teaching style video, or do you think there are really art collectors out there that would watch a YouTube art video? I do not think art collectors are watching YouTube videos. Art collectors, like a serious art collector, is looking for an investment, and they're not looking for a flash in the pan. And like it or not, I mean, on YouTube, we're flashes in the pan, is in the grand scheme of things. And I'm not saying that to berate myself, but as far as like art collectors are concerned, I think YouTubers, I think other social media artists are pretty inconsequential, myself included. Art collectors are looking for an investment, and art doesn't have worth until, or art doesn't have monetary worth until it is purchased. Like I could say this painting is worth $5,000, but unless somebody buys it for $5,000, it's not worth $5,000. If I donate it to a charity to raise money for something, I can only deduct the cost of the materials. So that's kind of the weird thing about the art world. If somebody buys a painting for $10,000, then that painting's worth $10,000. If somebody else buys it for $1 million, now it's worth $1 million. It's worth what somebody will pay for it. And there, I don't think a collector would risk. I just don't think they would bother with it. I don't think they would bother with YouTube creators like buying artwork from us. That said, there are wonderful, excited, engaged communities that will buy your artwork. If they like your videos, absolutely, they'll buy stickers or prints or original artworks from you, absolutely. I know a lot of YouTube artists that make part of their income by selling stickers and cards and prints of their artwork. And that type of collector absolutely will buy if they find you engaging, if they find you interesting, if they want to help you out, they want to help your business grow. Absolutely. It's just not going to be the collector in the sense of what we've known art collectors to be in the past. So I hope that answers your question. I think that's going to wrap it up for this week's Ask a Crafter. And I got a mental note myself that I need to edit. Of course, hopefully that won't make any sense to you watching this now, because you'll be like, why? What does she have to edit out? The long pause. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. And until next time, happy crafting. Bye.